The October sky was clear and cold, a velvet curtain dotted with stars as sharp as glass shards. The late autumn wind swept through the bare tree branches, carrying the rustle of dry leaves across the pavement and the chill that heralded the coming winter. Halloween night. From the living room window, I looked out onto the quiet street. Yellow light spilled from a few houses, jack-o'-lanterns with wide grins beginning to fade on the porches. Most of the children had gone home, their stomachs full of candy and their minds buzzing with ghost stories. I had cleared the dinner plates, turned off the porch light, and bolted the front door. For me, the festivities were over. I lived alone in this 2-story house, a sudden change after many years in the city. The quiet here was sometimes pleasant, but on nights like this, it felt too vast, too empty. Every creak of the old house, every whistle of the wind through the window frames was amplified, becoming suspicious sounds in the darkness. I sat in an armchair reading a book under the warm glow of a floor lamp. The fire in the hearth crackled, a pleasant companion. It was almost 11 p.m. I planned to finish the chapter and then head to bed. That was when I heard the knock on the door. Not the eager, rapid knocking of children, but 3 slow, deliberate, heavy knocks. I frowned, setting my book down. Probably a group of late-night teenagers. I sighed, got up, and went to the door. I didn't intend to open it, just to look through the peephole. Outside, under the dim security light, 3 figures were standing. They weren't wearing superhero or princess costumes. They were dressed as scarecrows, tattered flannel shirts, old overalls stuffed with straw, and frayed straw hats that hid most of their faces. What sent a chill down my spine were the masks. They weren't the cheap plastic kind from the supermarket. They were made of coarse burlap with clumsy stitches forming grotesque grins and empty, soulless eyes. They just stood there, motionless and silent. A sense of unease crept over me. It was too late for this kind of prank. "No more candy," I said loudly through the door, hoping my voice was firm enough to send them away. There was no reaction. They didn't move, didn't say a word. Their silence was more terrifying than any threat. I stared through the peephole, my heart beginning to beat faster. One of them, the one in the middle, slowly raised its head, and through the 2 holes cut in the burlap, I felt as if it were looking straight at me. I backed away, sliding the security chain into place. My hand was trembling slightly. This wasn't a joke. This was something else. I returned to the living room, trying to reassure myself that they would soon leave. Maybe they were just trying to scare a newcomer. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes. I tiptoed back to the front door, peeking through again. They were still there, motionless as statues in the night. Panic began to rise. I hurried through the ground floor, checking all the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked tight. My house, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening. There was only the sound of the fire and the thumping of my heart in my chest. Then I heard it. A small, scratching sound at the back of the house. I held my breath. The sound came again, clearer this time. Someone was at the back door, trying the handle. I rushed to the kitchen, peering out the window above the sink. One of the scarecrows was standing there, its back to me, its hand methodically twisting the doorknob. I quickly ducked down, hiding behind the kitchen counter. My breath came in ragged gasps. They were trying to get in. I needed to call the police. Where was my phone? It was charging on the small table next to the armchair in the living room. I had to get back there. Crawling on the floor, I moved as slowly and silently as I could. The old wooden floor groaned slightly under my weight, and I froze. The sound of the twisting doorknob stopped. Silence. After what felt like an eternity, I heard another sound. A light tap on the dining room window. I glanced in that direction. Another burlap face was pressed against the glass, its dark eye holes scanning the room. I was surrounded. I had no other choice. I lunged for the living room, snatching my phone. My hands trembled as I tried to unlock it. I was about to dial the emergency number when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The sound of shattering glass from upstairs. They were in. In a fit of panic, I dropped the phone. It slid under the armchair. There was no time to retrieve it. I heard heavy footsteps overhead, the sound of floorboards creaking under rough shoes. They were in the house. In my house. I needed a place to hide. A closet? Under the bed? Too obvious. My mind raced, searching for an option. Then I remembered. The cellar. The door to the cellar was hidden under a rug in the storage closet under the stairs. It was small, dusty, and I had never been down there. It was the perfect place. I bolted into the closet, pulled the rug aside. There was a wooden trapdoor with an iron ring. I pulled with all my might. A wave of musty, cold air hit my face. Below was pitch darkness. I had no time to hesitate. I could hear footsteps moving down the stairs. I lowered myself down, my feet searching for the wooden steps. Once I was steady, I carefully pulled the trapdoor shut, leaving a tiny crack just big enough to see and hear through. I backed deeper into the darkness, hiding behind some old wooden crates. The darkness in the cellar was almost absolute. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood filled my nostrils. My heart pounded as if it would burst. I heard the closet door open. A sliver of light cut through the crack in the trapdoor. A pair of muddy boots came into my view. Then a second pair. 2 scarecrows had entered the closet. They stood there for a moment. I held my breath, certain they could hear my heartbeat. I could see strands of straw sticking out of their sleeves. One of them bent down. I thought I had been discovered. But it just picked something up. A roll of duct tape and a length of rope had fallen from its pocket. They weren't here for candy. They left the closet, leaving the door open. I could hear better now. Their footsteps echoed through the house as they began a systematic search. The sound of closet doors being yanked open. The sound of furniture being overturned. They were not in a hurry. They were being meticulous, turning over every corner. I stood in the dark, shaking uncontrollably. What was happening? Why my house? I had only moved in 3 months ago. I had no enemies. Time passed in suffocating tension. I heard them upstairs, then downstairs again. I heard them in the kitchen, the sound of drawers being pulled out, dishes clattering. They were looking for something, or someone. Then silence fell. I strained my ears, but there was nothing. Had they left, or were they waiting? I didn't dare move. A creak directly above me. The closet door. I looked through the crack. A figure was standing in the doorway, looking in. The third scarecrow. It stepped inside, its eyes slowly scanning the small room. Then it looked down at the floor, at the displaced rug. My heart stopped. It slowly approached, its burlap head tilted to one side. It bent down, its gloved fingers tracing the edge of the trapdoor. It had found me. For a moment, paralyzed by fear, I could do nothing but stare at the dark eye holes looking down through the crack. Then, the survival instinct kicked in. Just as it began to lift the door, I acted. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a rotten piece of wood from a broken crate. With all my strength, I shoved the trapdoor upward. The unexpected impact threw the scarecrow off balance, and it fell backward, its head hitting the edge of a metal shelf. I didn't wait to see what happened. I scrambled out of the cellar, stumbled through the closet, and burst out. The other 2 scarecrows were in the living room. They turned at the noise. Their burlap faces turned toward me, surprise evident in their posture. I didn't run for the front door. They would block me. I ran for the back door in the kitchen. One of them gave chase, its long strides quickly closing the distance. I felt its hand grab at the back of my shirt. I grabbed the nearest thing on the kitchen counter, a heavy cast iron skillet. I spun around and swung it with all my might. The metal connected with the side of the scarecrow's head with a heavy thud. It staggered, and I used that moment to unlatch the back door and bolt out into the night. The cold air burned my lungs. I didn't look back, I just ran. I ran across the backyard, vaulted a low fence into the neighbor's yard. I heard angry shouts behind me, but I didn't dare stop. I ran through the dark streets, past the silent houses with their dying jack-o'-lanterns. I don't know how long I ran. Finally, when my lungs felt like they would explode and my legs gave out, I stopped, hiding behind a row of trees a few blocks from my house. I shakily pulled a backup phone from my jacket pocket, an old habit from my city days, and dialed the police. My voice was hoarse and breathless as I tried to explain what had happened. When the police cars arrived, their red and blue lights flashing across the houses, I finally dared to return. My house looked the same from the outside, but now it held a sinister air. The police went inside, and a short time later they brought out 2 men in handcuffs. The third was brought out on a stretcher. It was only later that I learned the truth. They weren't psychotic killers, they were thieves. The former owner of the house, according to rumors, had hidden a large sum of money somewhere inside before he died suddenly. The thieves had heard the rumor and thought Halloween was the perfect night to act, believing the house was still empty. They hadn't expected anyone to be home. They hadn't wanted to kill me, just to tie me up and search. I sat in a police car, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I looked at my house, the front door wide open, light spilling out like a wound. The safety was shattered. The quiet was torn apart. I had survived, but I knew I would never be able to look at the darkness the same way again. Monsters don't just exist in fairy tales. Sometimes they knock on your door, dressed as scarecrows with empty eyes and stitched-on smiles. And the most terrifying part is, underneath the masks, they're just people. The first time I saw the Harcourt mansion, I thought it had grown out of the ground rather than been built. The building loomed on a barren hill, enveloped by a pitch-black pine forest that swallowed the Halloween moonlight. The gravel road crunched under my tires, the only sound in the heavy silence of the New England countryside. I had been invited. That was the strange part. Me, Mark, a low-level programmer, receiving a thick, embossed card from Carter Harcourt, the CEO of our company. An honor, my colleagues had said. An opportunity. I parked my modest sedan among the sleek sports cars. The house was a chaotic mass of Gothic architecture with narrow windows emitting an orange and purple glow. Music drifted out, not the pulsing bass of a normal party, but a slow, out-of-place waltz. The party's theme was The Final Harvest. I just wore a simple suit and a leather plague doctor mask, its beak long and sharp. It made me feel ridiculous. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of expensive wine, perfume, and something else, a pungent, sweet odor I couldn't place. Pumpkin, perhaps. Hundreds of intricately carved pumpkins lined the hallway, but their faces weren't happy. They were screaming. The guests, they weren't in costumes. They were works of art. Everyone wore a mask, but not the cheap plastic kind. These were complex structures of leather, porcelain, and metal. A woman glided by, her torso covered in thousands of silk moths, her face a blank crystal facade. A tall man was dressed as a Victorian surgeon, gleaming brass tools dangling from his belt. No one spoke much. They moved to the waltz, masked heads tilting as they appraised one another. I went looking for Carter Harcourt to thank him, but I couldn't find the host. I wandered, my untouched champagne flute in hand. I went from room to room, the library filled with old leather-bound books, the gallery with portraits whose subjects' eyes seemed to have been gouged out. The air grew colder, even though the fireplaces in every room were blazing. I began to notice the other decorations. Along the main staircase, there were life-sized figures. They were made of rough burlap, stuffed with straw, and dressed in ragged clothes. Scarecrows. They were arranged in strange poses. One was kneeling, its head bowed. Another was hanging upside down from the balustrade by a rope. They were very detailed, too detailed. I could see the very texture of the coarse canvas in the flickering light. The party continued. The waltz gave way to a more jarring classical piece, a symphony I didn't recognize. I felt lost and isolated. The crow mask was starting to suffocate me. I headed toward the back garden for some air. The heavy French doors opened onto a stone terrace. And that's where I saw it. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a large, unlit pyre, surrounded by a circle of more scarecrows. But one of them was moving. I froze, the champagne flute slipping from my hand, landing on the stone without breaking. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight twitch of the hand. That hand was not made of burlap. It was flesh. A man in a Victorian surgeon's costume, the one I had seen earlier, approached the moving scarecrow. He was holding one of his brass instruments, something that looked like a large pair of shears. I couldn't hear anything over the shrill music from inside, but I saw the scarecrow tremble. The surgeon raised the instrument. I stepped back, bumping into the door. A small impact, but enough. The surgeon turned his head. His mask was a polished brass plate, reflecting the light from the house, completely hiding his features. He stood still for a moment, then slowly raised a gloved finger toward me. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I scrambled away from the spot. I stumbled back into the ballroom. The guests were still dancing, gliding past each other in the dim light. I ripped off my crow mask, gasping for air. I needed to leave. I tried to move toward the front door, but the crowd seemed thicker, deliberately blocking my path. Crystal faces and porcelain masks turned toward me as I pushed through. No one said anything. They just watched. I saw Carter Harcourt. Finally, he was standing by the fireplace talking to the moth woman. He wasn't wearing a mask. His ruddy, cheerful face looked grotesquely out of place in this room. "Carter," I called out, my voice hoarse. "There's something in the garden. A man, he's..." Carter smiled at me, a wide, friendly smile. "Mark, you made it? Are you enjoying the harvest?" "We have to call the police. Someone is hurt," I tried to explain, grabbing his arm. Carter's smile didn't waver. "Relax, my boy. It's just part of the show. Everything is part of the show." He patted my cheek. So the pat was ice cold. "Now," he said, his voice dropping, "I believe you dropped this." He held out my crow mask. I had dropped it by the door. A feeling of pure terror washed over me. I looked around. The Victorian surgeon was standing in the ballroom entrance. Beside him were two other men, dressed as medieval executioners, their heads covered in black leather hoods. They were looking straight at me. Carter whispered, his smile still fixed in place. "The trouble with the harvest is one always needs scarecrows, and we found ourselves one short." I shoved Carter aside, pushing past the moth woman. I didn't run for the front door. They were blocking it. I ran toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen. The mansion was a maze. The hallways seemed to stretch as I ran. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me. I burst into the kitchen. It was a huge industrial space of stainless steel, unnaturally clean. No staff, no chefs. Just a large pantry door on the far wall. I ran to it, yanking the handle. It was locked. Another door. The pantry. I dove in, slammed the door, and threw the bolt. I stood in total darkness, my back against the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break my ribs. The air in the room was cold and smelled of dust and dried herbs. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped outside the door. I fumbled in my pocket. My phone. I pulled it out, the screen's light blinding me. No signal. Of course not. This house was a stone fortress in the middle of nowhere. A sound thudded against the door. I backed away, tripping over something. It was a sack. I shined the phone's light on it. It was a pile of empty burlap sacks. Next to them were coils of thick rope and a large pile of dry straw. A heavy silence fell. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and shaky. Then a new sound, a metallic screech. They were doing something to the hinges. I swept the light around the cramped pantry. Shelves towered, packed with jars and boxes. On the back wall, there was what looked like an old dumbwaiter, a small metal chute for sending laundry to the basement. It was too small for me to fit. Next to it, a small fire axe was mounted on the wall behind a pane of glass. The door groaned. They were prying it from the frame. I had no choice. I smashed the glass with my phone. The shattering sound was deafening in the small space. I grabbed the axe. It was heavier than I expected. The door burst open. The surgeon stood there, his brass mask impassive. Behind him were the two executioners. They didn't rush. They knew I was cornered. "The harvest requires a sacrifice," the surgeon said. His voice was muffled through the metal, sounding like a buzz. I swung the axe. It was a desperate, clumsy gesture. I aimed for the closest man. He raised a leather-clad arm to block, and the axe head sunk deep into his forearm. There was no blood, only dry straw. His arm wasn't flesh. I froze for a second, long enough for the surgeon to grab my wrist. His grip was like a steel vise. He twisted, and I screamed as the axe clattered to the floor. The other executioner stepped forward, but the surgeon had made a mistake. The one I'd hit wasn't a dummy. It was a ruse. He'd stuffed straw under his loose tunic. As he looked down at his arm, his masked face turned, and I saw what he'd been concealing. One of those safety flares you use on a boat, tucked into his belt. In that instant of panic, I acted. I snatched the flare from his belt with my free hand. He roared, trying to hold me, but I pulled the trigger, pointing it straight at the massive pile of dry straw beside me. A deafening pop and a blast of crimson light. The straw ignited instantly. The fire went up with a whoosh, catching the dry sacks and the old wooden shelves. The pantry became a fire trap. The surgeon recoiled, shielding his metal face. The two executioners stumbled into each other. Thick black smoke billowed to the ceiling. The heat was incredible. They were afraid of the fire. Even predators are afraid of being burned. I charged past them. The flames caught their clothes. They screamed, real, muffled screams as they tried to beat out the fire. I didn't care. I ran through the kitchen, smoke billowing behind me. The ballroom was in chaos. The fire alarm was blaring, a shrill, deafening bell. The guests were screaming, their expensive masks looking ridiculous now as they scrambled for the front door. The elegance was gone, replaced by primal panic. I didn't join the crush. I ran back the way I'd come, through the library. I used the back of the axe, which I had somehow unconsciously grabbed again, to smash one of the narrow Gothic windows. Glass exploded outward. I climbed out, falling into the stiff ornamental bushes below. I didn't stop. I ran into the pitch-black pine forest, not caring as the branches clawed at my face and hands. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst. I only stopped when I reached the main road, miles away. Behind me, on top of the hill, the Harcourt mansion was a blazing torch against the Halloween night. I could see tiny, masked figures scrambling on the lawn, like insects exposed when you overturn a rock. I had survived. The police found me around 4 a.m., wandering down the highway, covered in soot and blood from my scratches. Carter Harcourt's story was convincing. A tragic fire, faulty wiring in the old kitchen wing. He'd lost everything. He was a victim. They found no bodies in the pantry, only ash. They never found the man in the surgeon's costume or the executioner's. They didn't find the moving scarecrow on the terrace. When dawn came, all that was left in the garden were charred wooden stakes. They said I was in shock, that the smoke had made me hallucinate, that the Halloween party, the costumes had made me paranoid. I know what I saw. I know what that grip felt like. I know the deliberate silence of predators. I was invited there, an unnoticed outsider, perfect for harvesting, a sacrifice for their entertainment. I moved. I live in a different city, in a high-rise apartment where I can see every street below. I don't go to parties, and I never, ever celebrate Halloween because I know that for some people the masks never come off, and the final harvest isn't over. They're simply waiting for the next season. The cold air smelled of dry leaves and burnt sugar. Halloween night in our suburb always smelled like that. A mix of smoke from smoldering leaf piles and the corn syrup smell from thousands of pieces of candy. I was 16 and I was too old for this. But Leo was 8 and my little brother considered the 31st of October to be the most important event of the year, more important than Christmas or his birthday. And as usual, I was stuck on chaperone duty. "Hurry up, Alex," Leo called, his voice muffled through the plastic Spider-Man mask. His cheap onesie was too thin for the October cold, but he was vibrating with excitement, not cold. I breathed out a white puff of air. "I'm coming, and don't run too far ahead." My costume was an exercise in laziness. A ripped shirt, a bandana, and a cheap plastic eye patch. A lazy pirate. The pillowcase I carried for candy was still disappointingly light. We had only just started. Our neighborhood, Ancient Oaks, was perfect for this. The colonial-style houses were set far apart, their wide lawns transformed into ghoulish graveyards, decorated with styrofoam tombstones and fake spiderwebs that billowed in the wind. Fog machines pumped out opaque white smoke that clung to the ground. Hundreds of kids in different costumes, witches, vampires, movie characters, moved in loud groups. Laughter and pretend screams echoed, muffled by the night air. We followed the flow. "Trick or treat," Leo would yell at every door, thrusting his plastic pumpkin bucket forward. Adults would coo over his costume and drop miniature candy bars into it. I hung back, leaning against a porch column or standing under a streetlight, hands jammed in my jacket pockets. I checked my phone. My friends were at a party 3 streets over. I had promised to come by after I ditched Leo back home. We had been at it for about an hour. My pillowcase was starting to get heavy. The wind picked up, carrying a deeper chill. The younger groups of kids started to thin out, called home by their parents. Only the older kids were left, and the atmosphere began to change. The shadows between the houses seemed thicker. The decorations didn't look as campy anymore. We were at the end of Willow Creek Lane, a long cul-de-sac with only 6 houses. It was always darker than other places. Only 3 houses had their porch lights on. Leo, high on sugar, trotted toward the last house, a large Tudor-style home plunged in almost complete darkness. "Leo, wait," I called. "Their lights are off. They're not giving out candy. But they have a bowl," he pointed. Sure enough, in the faint light from the streetlight 50 yards away, I could see a large bowl set on a small chair on the porch. The honor system. Leo ran up the stone walkway. I sighed, shuffling after him. By the time I reached the steps, Leo was already digging into the bowl and pulled out 2 full-sized candy bars. "Jackpot!" he whispered. It was then that I noticed a decoration I hadn't seen before. On the far side of the porch, deep in the shadows where the streetlight couldn't reach, there was a figure standing. It was tall, much taller than me. It wore what looked like dark, baggy coveralls. But it was the head that made me stop. It wasn't wearing a monster mask. It was something simpler and infinitely more disturbing. A plain, white, featureless mask. No nose, no mouth, just 2 small, black, circular holes for eyes. It was like a smooth, blank mannequin head. It was perfectly still. A great decoration. Very realistic. "Cool," I muttered, nodding toward it. "Let's go, Leo." Leo wasn't paying attention. He was busy stuffing the candy into his bucket. I tugged his sleeve. As we turned and walked down the path, I glanced back over my shoulder. The figure had turned its head. The 2 black eye holes were now pointed directly at me. My heart did a quick stutter step. I blinked. It had to be the light. A shadow. I pulled Leo a little harder. "Come on." We turned out of the cul-de-sac and back onto the main road. The crowds had thinned out significantly. The street was almost quiet now, just the sound of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. "Alex, my feet are tired," Leo whined. "We're almost done. This block, and then we'll head back." I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. It was Halloween. People were allowed to do scary things. Someone had dressed up and was standing still as a statue to scare trick-or-treaters. Perfectly normal. We hit 2 more houses. I felt it before I saw it. The prickling sensation of being watched. I stopped under a streetlight, pretending to adjust my eye patch. I glanced across the street. About half a block down, on the other side of the road, it was standing. The figure in the coveralls. The smooth white mask. It was standing next to a mailbox, staring right at us. A coincidence. It had to be. Another older kid trick-or-treating in a creepy costume. "Leo, walk a little faster," I said, my voice low. We kept moving. Leo's small footsteps and the scuff of my sneakers sounded loud in the silence. After about 20 paces, I couldn't help it. I looked back. It had moved. It had crossed the street. It was on our side of the pavement now, still half a block away. And it was walking, a slow, deliberate, steady pace, not rushing at all. My throat went dry. "Okay, Leo, run! To the next house!" I didn't want to scare him, but I grabbed his hand and we broke into a jog. We ran up the walkway of the next house, a ranch-style place decorated with orange lights. We didn't even say trick or treat. A woman opened the door and dropped candy in our bags, looking at us with confusion at our haste. As we ran back to the sidewalk, I looked down the street. It was closer, only 4 houses away. It had stopped when we stopped. Now it resumed walking, still at that same unhurried, unchanging rhythm. It was closing the distance. This wasn't a joke. "Alex, what's wrong?" Leo asked, his voice trembling. "Nothing. It's a game. See who can get home fastest. We're taking the shortcut through Maple Park. But Mom and Dad said not to." "Tonight it's fine," I cut him off. Maple Park was a dark, undeveloped strip of land that ran parallel to our neighborhood, a shortcut we used during the day. At night, it was a black tunnel, but it would get us home 2 blocks faster than going around, and more importantly, it would get us out of sight of that thing. I pulled Leo off the sidewalk, across a lawn and onto the park's entrance. The gravel path was barely visible in the dark. The trees blocked out what little moonlight there was. Our feet crunched on the gravel. "I can't see," Leo whimpered, stumbling. "Just hold my hand." I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight. The cold white beam lit up the narrow path, turning the bushes on either side into grotesque shapes. We were moving as fast as we could. I didn't dare look back. I just listened. I heard nothing but my own gasping breath, Leo's sniffles, and the scattering gravel under our feet. Maybe we'd lost it. Relief started to creep into my tight chest. The path was only about 300 yards long. We were almost out. I could see the streetlights of our street up ahead. Then I heard it. Not the crunch of gravel, but a softer, heavier sound. The press of grass being stepped on. It wasn't on the path behind us. It was moving parallel to us through the trees. I clicked off the phone's flashlight. Instant darkness swallowed us, thick and suffocating. "Get down," I whispered, pulling Leo to the ground behind a large bush. We held our breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it could be heard. Leo was trembling beside me. I stared into the darkness of the woods. Nothing, just black tree trunks. Then I saw it. Not a clear image, but an absence of light. A large silhouette moving between two trees, blocking out the dim stars behind it. It was in the grass about 15 yards off the path, and it had stopped. It was listening. Its white mask turned toward us. It couldn't see us. No way. It stood there. 1 second. 10 seconds. A minute. A dead, heavy silence. Then it started to walk, not forward, but directly toward our bush. It knew. "Run!" I screamed. I grabbed Leo and hauled him to his feet. We burst from the bushes, back onto the path, and sprinted for the light at the end. I didn't look back again. I just ran, dragging my brother with me. The candy pillowcase thumped against my back, heavy. We spilled out of the park, stumbling onto the sidewalk of Elm Street's head, our street. Our house was just 6 doors down. The porch light was on, a warm yellow beacon. We made the final sprint. I charged up the walkway, towing Leo behind me. I didn't bother with my key. I hammered on the door with my fist. "Mom, Dad, open the door." Leo started to cry, full-on panicked sobs. I glanced back down the street. From the dark mouth of the park, the figure emerged. It stopped on the sidewalk, under the streetlight. It just stood there, 6 houses away, and watched us. It didn't follow. It didn't have to. The door flew open. My mom was standing there, her face a mask of worry. "Alex, what is it?" "What are you?" I pushed Leo inside. "Get in! Lock the door!" I squeezed past her and slammed the door shut. I turned the deadbolt. I latched the chain. My mom grabbed my shoulders. "What in the world is going on?" "Someone," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Someone was following us, from Willow Lane all the way through the park. My dad came out of the living room. "What did you say?" I ran to the living room window, pulling the curtain aside. My heart just about stopped. The sidewalk, where it had been standing, was empty. "It was right there," I said, my voice shaking. "Right under the light, in coveralls, a white mask." My dad looked out the window, over my shoulder. "There's no one there, Alex. It was probably just another kid trying to scare you." "No," I yelled, turning to face him. "It wasn't a kid." It was huge, and it just kept following. It didn't say anything. It just followed. Leo was sobbing into my mom's coat, his face buried in her jacket. All right, my dad said, seeing the real panic in my eyes. He went to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch. He looked left, then right. The night air was still. The neighborhood was quiet again. He stood there for a long moment, then came back inside, locking the door behind him. "There's nothing," he said, his voice softer. "You got spooked. It's Halloween. Everything seems scarier in the dark." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that he didn't understand. Its silence, the way it moved, the way it knew where we were in the park. But I saw the look on my mom's face and the way Leo was shaking, and I shut my mouth. I let them guide us into the kitchen, where it was bright and warm. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, light on, staring out my second-story bedroom window. Our street was quiet. Not a single person, not a single car. I was alive. Leo was safe. That's what mattered. But I couldn't shake the image. The blank white mask turning toward me in the park's darkness. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was something so much worse. It was a person. A person who had seen 2 kids, one big and one small, alone in the dark, and had decided to follow. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know what it would have done if it had caught us. And that was the scariest part. That Halloween night, I paid to be scared. $50 for a ticket to Blackwood Asylum, an elaborately produced haunted house set up in an old warehouse in an abandoned industrial park. They advertised it as a truly terrifying experience, and indeed, they weren't exaggerating. I had gotten separated from my friends somewhere between the corridor with padded walls and the morgue with its cold stainless steel drawers. That was part of the game. They would split up the groups, letting the loneliness gnaw at your courage before actors in horrific costumes jumped out from the darkness. I didn't mind. I always liked the thrill of being alone, the heavy silence broken only by the sound of my heart pounding in my chest and the eerie background music playing from hidden speakers. The surrounding space was meticulously designed. Artificial fog hovered over the floor, cold and smelling faintly of chemicals. The lights flickered continuously, sometimes a sickly green, other times blood red, each flash revealing grotesque figures for a fleeting moment. I passed through an abandoned operating room. rusty medical instruments scattered on a metal table. A dark red splash of fake blood looked disturbingly real. I had to admit the design team had done their job very well. As I entered the next area, a long and narrow row of cells, another scent began to creep into the air. It was sharper, more acrid than the artificial fog. A pungent smell of burning plastic and something organic being heated. At first, I assumed it was just a new effect, a way to assault the visitor's sense of smell. Clever. But then the heat began to touch the back of my neck. This heat was not like the warmth radiating from a purposefully placed heater. It was dry and intense, making the air thick and harder to breathe. The fake fog at my feet seemed to dissipate, replaced by a thick gray smoke billowing from the end of the hallway. The screams continued to echo from ahead, but their tone had changed. They were no longer the feigned, excited shrieks of people who wanted to be scared. They were frantic, broken cries, full of panic and desperation, real. They sounded too real. A cold sense of unease ran down my spine. The game had gone too far, or perhaps this was no longer a game. The lights flickered more frantically and then went out, plunging the hallway into almost absolute darkness. Only one light remained, an orange, flickering glow at the end of the cell block, where the thick black smoke was pouring out like a rising monster. Survival instinct took over, overriding all curiosity. I turned, trying to run back the way I'd come. But I was no longer alone. The darkness behind me suddenly came alive. Dozens of people, other guests, were rushing towards me like a flood. They weren't screaming. They were just panting and shoving, a panicking mass of bodies with only one goal: to get out. I was swept up in the crowd. Someone elbowed me in the ribs. Another hand clawed at my face as they tried to push past. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and smoke. I couldn't see anything, only feel the pressure of bodies pressing against me from all sides, pushing me forward, deeper into this deadly maze. My cough was lost amidst the chaotic sounds of mass panic. We were herded into a larger room, perhaps the common area of the asylum. Overturned tables and chairs were scattered about. In the middle of the room, a mannequin in a patient's gown hung from a rope. In the dim orange light cast from the hallways, the scene looked like a demonic dance. The fire had reached here. Small sparks danced on the ceiling, and a wall decorated with the scribbled drawings of mental patients was beginning to char. The crowd hesitated for a moment, blocked by a wall of fire that was gradually forming. That hesitation lasted only a moment before a fear greater than the fire pushed them forward. People scattered, searching for any possible exit. Some tried to break the boarded-up windows. Others desperately pulled at steel doors marked "No Exit." I knew that following the crowd was suicide. I had to think. During one of the light's flickers, before it went out completely, I remembered glimpsing a door that looked different from the others. It didn't have fake rust or gruesome lettering. It was just a simple gray-painted metal door with a small sign that read "Maintenance." It was in a hidden corner, behind an old hospital bed. Separating myself from the human torrent was a struggle. I felt like I was swimming against a river of stones. I crouched low, weaving through trampling legs, breathing in the less smoky air near the floor. The heat from the burning wall blasted one side of my face. I reached the hospital bed and slipped behind it. The door was still there. The doorknob was hot, but I didn't care. I turned it. Locked. Of course, it was locked. Desperation rose in my throat like bitter bile. I looked around for something to break the door with. Nearby was an old fire extinguisher, probably just a prop mounted on the wall. I yanked it from its bracket with all my strength. It was heavier than I thought. I swung the extinguisher at the doorknob. Once, twice. The clash of metal on metal created jarring sounds, out of place amidst the roar of the fire and the screams of people. After the third blow, the lock mechanism broke. I turned the knob and the door opened a crack. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed through the opening and slammed the door shut behind me, sealing myself off from the chaos. Inside was a narrow, dark, and dusty service corridor. No effects, no decorations, just cold concrete walls and pipes running along the ceiling. The air here was a little fresher, though it still reeked of smoke. I could hear the fire roaring and the structure of the warehouse groaning as it collapsed on the other side of the wall. I followed the wall, walking in near total darkness. My hand brushed against the rough concrete surface to keep my balance. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever. Every step was a gamble. Would it lead outside or just to a dead end, another trap? After a while, I saw it. A faint sliver of light in the distance, a blurry green rectangle, an exit sign. Never in my life had I seen a more beautiful and hopeful image. I started to run, my legs tired and stumbling. The light grew larger. I could feel a cool draft of air blowing towards me. I pushed hard on the exit door's crossbar. It swung open, and I tumbled out, landing on the cold gravel of the parking lot. The fresh night air filled my lungs, a painful but wonderful sensation. I coughed violently, expelling smoke, dust, and fear. When I managed to get up and look back, the entire warehouse was a giant torch blazing against the night sky. Columns of black smoke billowed upward, carrying ash and the unfinished dreams of a Halloween night. Around me was a scene from hell on earth. Fire trucks, ambulances, flashing lights everywhere. Other survivors were sitting on the ground, some crying, some just staring at the flames with lifeless eyes. Many were still in their costumes, a vampire with a face smeared with tears and soot, a zombie with a burned arm, a princess with a scorched ball gown. The contrast between the festive attire and the real tragedy unfolding was grotesque, so wrong. I found my friends among the crowd. They had escaped through another exit. We hugged each other without saying a word. No words could describe what we had just been through. That night, I paid to be scared. But the fear I received was not the controlled fear of an amusement. It was the primal terror of facing death, of witnessing the thin line between order and chaos being incinerated. The image of the fire, the feeling of the heat on my skin, the sound of mass panic, and the smell of smoke will never leave me. Blackwood Asylum had delivered a truly real experience, an experience that I will carry for the rest of my life like an invisible scar on my soul.